October 3rd, 1944, 6:47 a.m. The morning sun broke pale and cold over the Lorraine countryside, casting long shadows across the muddy field outside Arracourt. The air smelled of cordite and burned metal. Smoke still rose from the hulk of a Panther tank knocked out during the previous day's fighting, its long 75mm gun pointing uselessly toward the eastern sky. Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower stood beside the wreck, his boots caked with French mud, his expression unreadable. 12 miles north, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams commanded 47 Sherman tanks of the 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division. His orders were clear: advance at dawn toward the town of Moyenvic, exploit the gap in German lines, push east toward the Saar River. The engines were running, the crews were mounted. In 6 minutes, they would begin their advance into what intelligence believed was lightly defended territory. The mathematics were simple: 47 American Shermans against scattered German infantry and perhaps a dozen anti-tank guns. The outcome seemed assured. But what Eisenhower was about to pull from that knocked-out Panther would change everything. Within 20 minutes, Patton's advance would halt. Within 3 hours, 4th Armored Division would reposition completely. And within 48 hours, American forces would fight one of the most crucial engagements of the campaign in a location no one had planned to defend. This is the story of how a single document found in the wreckage of a German tank revealed a trap that would have destroyed an entire American armored battalion. If you're interested in the untold stories of World War II, the intelligence discoveries that prevented disasters, the split-second decisions that changed entire campaigns, consider subscribing to our channel. We bring you the history that textbooks forgot, told with the respect these veterans deserve and the analytical precision their sacrifices demand. The story begins not at Arracourt on October 3rd, but 3 weeks earlier in eastern France. September 12, 1944. The Allied breakout from Normandy had become a race. Patton's Third Army had covered 400 miles in 4 weeks, liberating towns faster than supply trucks could follow. The German army appeared to be in full retreat, disorganized, demoralized. Victory seemed inevitable. But along the roads leading east, American reconnaissance units began reporting something unexpected: abandoned German vehicles in numbers that didn't match the pattern of a routed army. Major Oscar Koch, Patton's chief intelligence officer, compiled reports from 12 different reconnaissance units. He noticed a pattern. German units were abandoning equipment not because they were fleeing, but because they were redeploying. Tank transporters moving east at night, fuel trucks following specific routes, radio intercepts suggesting regrouping rather than retreat. Koch sent his analysis to Patton with a single-line conclusion: the Germans are not running, they are reorganizing for counterattack. Patton read Koch's report on September 15th. He had just received news that fuel shortages would halt Third Army's advance within 48 hours. The Red Ball Express could not keep pace. Eisenhower had to make choices. Montgomery's 21st Army Group needed fuel for Operation Martin Garden. Bradley's forces needed supplies in Belgium. Patton's Third Army, furthest from supply ports, would wait. The decision infuriated Patton, but it gave him time to prepare defenses. If Koch was right about a German counterattack, Third Army needed to shift from exploitation to defense. Patton ordered commanders to establish defensive positions along the Moselle River, fortify key towns, prepare for armored combat on ground they chose. Colonel Bruce Clark, commanding Combat Command A of 4th Armored Division, received orders to defend the sector around Arracourt, a small town in rolling farm country that offered good sightlines for anti-tank defense. On October 18th, the Germans attacked. 5th Panzer Army, commanded by General Hasso von Montefeld, struck with 2 Panzer brigades, 11th Panzer Division, over 250 tanks. Many were Panthers mounting the 75mm KWK-42 gun that could destroy a Sherman at ranges beyond 2,000 yards. The German objective was clear: destroy 4th Armored Division, recapture Arracourt, push American forces back across the Moselle. The battle that followed over 11 days became legendary. American tank crews, outgunned and outnumbered, used superior tactics, terrain, and coordination to defeat German armor repeatedly. By October 1st, 5th Panzer Army had lost 86 tanks destroyed and 114 damaged or broken down. 4th Armored Division lost 41 tanks total. The kill ratio was roughly 3-to-1 in favor of the Americans. The German counteroffensive had failed completely. But intelligence officers at 3rd Army headquarters noticed something troubling in the wreckage. Among destroyed Panthers and Mark IVs, recovery teams found documents, maps with operational overlays, radio codes. Most concerning were orders dated September 25th, a week after the offensive began, indicating German forces were planning a second, larger operation. The documents were fragmentary, partially burned, incomplete. They suggested a major armored concentration forming northeast of Arracourt, but didn't specify where or when. Eisenhower arrived at 3rd Army headquarters on October 2nd to personally assess the situation. He had read intelligence reports, studied maps. He wanted to see the battlefield himself, to understand how Patton's forces achieved such favorable kill ratios against technically superior German armor. Patton gave him a tour of the killing fields around Arracourt, showing knocked-out Panthers, explaining tactics his tank commanders had developed. But Eisenhower's mind was on the future. If Germans were planning another major offensive, 3rd Army needed to be ready. If American forces continued advancing east as planned, they risked walking into an ambush before German intentions became clear. That question would be answered the next morning in the wreckage of a Panther tank that American engineers were preparing to recover for technical analysis. General George S. Patton, Jr. was many things: a student of military history since childhood, a veteran of tank warfare since 1918, a commander who believed in speed, aggression, and the offensive spirit. He was also, contrary to his public persona, a careful planner who understood logistics, intelligence, and the limits of armored warfare. Patton knew his Shermans were outgunned by Panthers. He knew frontal assaults against prepared positions would result in unacceptable casualties. But he also understood something critics did not grasp. Tanks do not fight tanks alone. Armies fight armies. By early October, 3rd Army had established a defensive line along the Moselle River from Nancy north to Thionville, a front of approximately 60 miles. Patton's forces held bridgeheads on the eastern bank at several key points, including Arracourt. The plan for October called for a resumption of offensive operations. 3rd Army would break out from these bridgeheads, advance east toward the Saar River, cross into Germany, drive toward the Rhine. The critical phase involved expanding the Arracourt salient. Colonel Abrams, commanding 37th Tank Battalion, had orders to advance northeast from Arracourt toward Moyenvic, a small town 12 miles distant that sat astride a major road junction. Seizing Moyenvic would open routes for further exploitation and threaten German supply lines. Intelligence estimated German strength at perhaps 200 infantry with limited anti-tank support. The 47 Shermans of 37th Tank Battalion would be more than adequate. But intelligence was wrong. German High Command had authorized Operation Panzerfaust, a limited objective attack designed to destroy American armored spearheads before they could threaten the West Wall fortifications. The operation would employ the newly formed 106th Panzer Brigade with 42 Panthers and 28 Mark IVs, along with reconstituted 113th Panzer Brigade with 38 replacement Panthers. In total, 108 German tanks were moving into positions around Moyenvic, preparing to ambush any American advance. The plan was sophisticated. Rather than defend Moyenvic directly, German forces would allow American spearheads to advance into town, then attack from 3 sides simultaneously, cutting off the American force and destroying it in detail. Extensive minefields had been laid on southern and northern approaches. Anti-tank guns were positioned in depth. Panthers would engage from hull-down positions on high ground east of town, where their superior range would be decisive. If the plan worked, 4th Armored Division would lose an entire battalion in a single morning. Hitler himself had approved the operation, viewing it as a model for how German forces should fight in the West. Defend in depth, lure American armor into killing zones, use superior German gunnery and armor to achieve local superiority despite overall numerical disadvantage. If Operation Panzerfaust succeeded, similar tactics would be employed all along the Western Front, potentially stalling the Allied advance for months. October 3rd, 6:47 a.m. Eisenhower stood beside the knocked-out Panther, waiting as engineers prepared to remove the turret for transport to technical intelligence units in Nancy. The Panther had been killed the previous afternoon by a shot from a Sherman tank destroyer that penetrated the thinner side armor at 400 yards. The German crew had bailed out, leaving behind personal equipment, maps, operational documents. Standard procedure called for materials to be collected and forwarded to intelligence, but the volume of destroyed vehicles meant document recovery often lagged days behind fighting.
This particular Panther belonged to 113th Panzer Brigade's command company. The tank commander had been a captain, an unusually high rank for a single tank, suggesting this was a command vehicle. Eisenhower watched as engineers pried open turret hatches, jammed shut by the internal explosion. Inside, the turret was chaos, burned equipment, scattered papers. One engineer, Sergeant James Holloway from Pennsylvania, began carefully removing documents, checking each for tactical intelligence value. Most papers were routine, daily status reports, fuel consumption logs, ammunition inventories. But one document, partially protected by being wedged under radio equipment, caught Holloway's attention. It was a map overlay, marked with characteristic German tactical symbols that Allied intelligence officers had learned to read. The overlay showed positions around a town labeled Moyenvic. Holloway had never heard of Moyenvic, but he recognized tactical significance immediately. German positions formed a classic ambush configuration, anti-tank guns in prepared positions, armor hull down on flanks, minefields blocking withdrawal routes. Holloway handed the map to his platoon leader, Lieutenant Marcus Webb. Webb compared it to his own map. Moyenvic was 12 miles northeast, exactly along the axis 4th Armored Division planned to advance that morning. Webb immediately understood what he was looking at, not historical positions from previous battle, but current positions for a planned ambush. The map was dated October 2nd, yesterday. Positions were marked with unit designations: 106th Panzer Brigade, 113th Panzer Brigade, numbers indicating far more German armor than intelligence estimated existed in the entire sector. Webb ran to find Eisenhower. The Supreme Commander was speaking with the engineer company commander. Webb interrupted, showing him the map overlay. Eisenhower studied it for 15 seconds without speaking. Then he looked east toward Moyenvic, 12 miles distant, where 47 American Shermans were about to advance directly into the killing zone the map depicted. Eisenhower checked his watch, 6:52 a.m. He turned to his aide, Lieutenant Colonel John Eisenhower, his son serving as liaison officer with 3rd Army. "Get me General Patton immediately. Radio, not telephone. This can't wait." The radio call went through 3rd Army's tactical network at 6:54 a.m. Patton was at his forward command post in Nancy, 15 miles south of Arracourt, reviewing the day's operations orders.
When the radio operator called him to the communications vehicle, Patton expected a routine status update. Instead, he heard Eisenhower's voice, clipped and urgent. "George, I'm at the Panther wreck site outside Arracourt. We found a German operational map dated yesterday. Shows a major ambush set around Moyenvic. 2 Panzer brigades, over 100 tanks. Your 37th Tank Battalion is about to drive straight into it." Patton's response was immediate. "How current is the intelligence?" Eisenhower read from the map overlay, unit designations, position coordinates, minefield locations. The detail was extraordinary, far more specific than anything captured in previous engagements. This wasn't a planning document. This was an operational order, the kind carried by commanders who needed to coordinate with adjacent units. Patton made his decision in 5 seconds. "Halt the advance. I'll get orders to Abrams immediately." At 6:56 a.m., Patton's operations officer, Colonel Hallie Maddox, sent an urgent radio transmission to 4th Armored Division headquarters. "Operation Sabre is canceled. Halt all movement. Regimental commanders report to Division CP immediately." The message reached Combat Command A at 6:58 a.m. Colonel Bruce Clark immediately radioed Lieutenant Colonel Abrams, "Sabre canceled. Hold current positions. Await further orders." Abrams received the transmission at 7 a.m. exactly. His 47 Shermans were already moving, having begun their advance 3 minutes earlier. They had covered perhaps 800 yards from their assembly areas, still within the American defensive perimeter around Arracourt. Abrams gave the order to halt. Within 2 minutes, 47 Shermans stopped their engines, commanders wondering what had caused the sudden cancellation of an operation planned for 3 days. They would not learn the answer until much later, but the decision to halt them would save their lives. Eisenhower, still at the Panther wreck site, continued examining documents Sergeant Holloway had recovered. Beyond the operational overlay, there were 2 other significant items. The first was a typed order, partially burned but legible, detailing the timeline for Operation Panzerfaust. German forces were to be in final positions by dawn on October 3rd. American forces were expected to advance toward Moyenvic between 7 and 8 a.m., based on observed patterns. The ambush would be sprung when American lead elements entered the town. The second document was more disturbing, a casualty estimate, projecting German forces would destroy 30 to 40 American tanks in the initial engagement, with minimal German losses due to superior positioning and firepower. The German assessment was not propaganda. It was cold operational analysis, and Eisenhower knew it was probably accurate. If Abrams' 47 Shermans had advanced into Moyenvic as planned, they would have driven directly into a carefully prepared kill zone, defended by more than twice their number in German tanks, all technically superior, all positioned to engage at maximum range.
By 7:10 a.m., Patton had assembled his senior commanders via radio conference. Bradley, commanding 12th Army Group, was patched in from Luxembourg. Eisenhower participated from the field site. The question was simple: how to respond to a German ambush that had been discovered but not yet sprung. There were 2 options. First, avoid Moyenvic entirely, shift the axis of advance to a different sector, leave the German ambush force waiting for an attack that would never come. Second, attack Moyenvic, but with full knowledge of German dispositions, using that intelligence advantage to turn the German trap against its creators. Patton argued for the second option. His reasoning was tactical and strategic. Tactically, the German force at Moyenvic represented the last significant armored reserve in the Lorraine sector. If those tanks could be destroyed, German defensive capabilities would collapse, opening the way for rapid advance to the Saar River. Strategically, allowing a German ambush force to remain intact meant those tanks could be repositioned to threaten other American operations. Better to fight them now on terms favorable to American forces than face them later under less advantageous conditions. Eisenhower agreed, but with conditions. The attack on Moyenvic would not be a simple armored thrust. It would be a deliberate, combined arms operation with overwhelming force. 4th Armored Division would be reinforced with additional tank battalions, tank destroyer battalions to counter German armor at range, massive artillery support. Airstrikes would be called in as soon as weather permitted.
Most importantly, the attack would come from an unexpected direction, hitting German positions from the flank rather than driving directly into the prepared kill zone from the west. The plan came together within 2 hours. While German forces waited in their ambush positions around Moyenvic, American forces would reposition during October 3rd. The 37th Tank Battalion, originally tasked with the direct advance, would instead move north under cover, circling around German positions. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats mounting 76mm guns, would approach from the south, using a route through forested terrain the captured German map showed was undefended. Artillery battalions would mass fires on German positions starting at dawn on October 4th, fixing German forces in place while American armor maneuvered. The critical advantage was intelligence. German commanders at Moyenvic had prepared their ambush based on the assumption that American forces did not know their positions. They expected to achieve surprise, to catch American tanks in the open, to engage at long range against targets that would not even know where fire was coming from. Instead, American commanders knew exactly where every German tank was positioned, where minefields were laid, where anti-tank guns were dug in. The hunters had become the hunted. October 3rd passed in careful preparation. German observation posts around Moyenvic reported unusual American activity around Arracourt, vehicle movements, but not in the direction of Moyenvic. Radio intercepts suggested confusion in American headquarters, cancellation of operations, delays due to supply issues. This fit German understanding of American operational patterns. The Allies, they believed, were logistically dependent, slow to react, predictable. The ambush would work. They simply had to wait. But while German forces waited, American forces moved. The 37th Tank Battalion completed a 25-mile night march through American-controlled territory, arriving at assembly areas north of Moyenvic by 4 a.m. on October 4th. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion moved into positions south of town, their lighter vehicles navigating forest trails German reconnaissance had dismissed as impassable to armor. By dawn on October 4th, German forces at Moyenvic were surrounded, though they did not yet realize it. At 5:47 a.m., exactly 24 hours after Eisenhower had pulled the operational map from the knocked-out Panther, American artillery opened fire. 12 battalions, 144 guns, concentrating on German positions identified in the captured documents. The barrage lasted 20 minutes, 2,880 rounds of high explosive and white phosphorus raining down on positions German crews believed were concealed. Panthers and Mark IVs dug in hull down to ambush an enemy from the west, found themselves under artillery fire from the south. At 6:07 a.m., the artillery shifted targets, walking east away from town. Abrams' 47 Shermans, advancing from the north, entered Moyenvic against minimal resistance. German infantry positioned to defend the town had pulled back during the artillery barrage, falling back to the Panthers that were supposed to provide overwatch. But those Panthers were facing the wrong direction, caught between American armor advancing from the north and tank destroyers engaging from the south. The battle that followed was not the ambush German commanders had planned. It was a meeting engagement, both sides maneuvering for advantage, but with American forces holding every card. They knew where German tanks were positioned. They had superior numbers at the point of contact. They had artillery support that could shift targets in minutes. Most critically, they had seized the initiative. German crews, trained to fight from prepared positions at long range, found themselves fighting a mobile engagement at close quarters, exactly the kind of fight where American advantages in crew training and tactical flexibility were decisive.
Sergeant Thomas Archer commanded a Sherman in Company B, 37th Tank Battalion. He had fought at Arracourt during previous weeks, learned through hard experience how to kill Panthers despite the Sherman's technical disadvantages. His crew had developed a system. The gunner aimed for tracks first, immobilize the target, then maneuver for flank shots where the Sherman's 75mm gun could penetrate. At Moyenvic, Archer's training paid off within the first 10 minutes. His Sherman rounded a stone barn on the northern edge of town at 6:15 a.m. 300 yards away, a Panther was attempting to reposition, reversing from its prepared hull-down position to face the unexpected threat from the north. The German crew was skilled, but they were reacting, not attacking. Archer's gunner, Corporal James Mitchell from Ohio, didn't wait for the Panther to complete its maneuver. He aimed for the exposed lower hull, the drive sprocket visible as the Panther backed up. One shot. The tracks separated. The Panther lurched to a stop, immobilized. Two more Shermans from Archer's platoon appeared. Within 30 seconds, 6 rounds hit the disabled Panther from 2 different angles. The German crew bailed out, running for cover as their tank burned. This was the pattern that repeated across the Moyenvic battlefield that morning. German tanks caught out of position, forced to maneuver under fire, engaged by American crews who had learned to exploit every tactical advantage. By 8 a.m., 23 German tanks had been destroyed or abandoned. American losses? 12 Shermans damaged, 38 men killed, 67 wounded. The disparity was not just statistical. It represented a fundamental shift in armored warfare doctrine that German commanders had failed to recognize. Eisenhower visited the battlefield on October 5th. He walked among the captured Panthers, examining vehicles that had been intended to ambush American forces. Engineers were cataloging the tanks, measuring armor thickness, testing guns, documenting everything that could be learned. One Panther in particular interested Eisenhower, the command tank from which the operational map had been recovered. The tank had been killed by a single shot, but the document it contained saved dozens of American lives and turned a potential disaster into decisive victory. The Supreme Commander called a meeting with his intelligence staff that evening at 3rd Army headquarters. He wanted to understand how German planning for Operation Panzerfaust had remained undetected until the last moment. The answer was sobering. German operational security had been excellent. Radio communications were minimal, conducted via landline or courier when possible. Troop movements happened at night. The ambush force had assembled in forested areas that concealed tank concentrations from observation. Without the captured map, American intelligence would have had no warning until the first German shots were fired. This reality forced a broader question. How many other German ambushes might be waiting, undetected, along Third Army's planned routes of advance? The answer led to immediate changes in operational procedures. Patton ordered all future offensive operations to be preceded by aggressive reconnaissance in force. Small combined arms teams designed to probe German positions and trigger ambushes prematurely. Artillery preparation would be heavier, longer in duration, covering wider areas. Tank battalions would advance with tank destroyer battalions in close support. Most significantly, Eisenhower ordered accelerated efforts to capture and analyze German operational documents from every engagement. Intelligence teams were attached to forward combat units with orders to examine knocked-out German vehicles immediately before documents could be destroyed or lost. A new priority system classified certain types of German tanks, command vehicles, reconnaissance vehicles, artillery observation vehicles as high-value targets for document recovery. The operational map recovered from the Panther outside Arracourt became the model for intelligence that could change battles before they were fought.
The impact extended beyond tactics. In Washington, Army Chief of Staff General George Marshall received Eisenhower's after-action report on the Moyenvic engagement. Marshall noted particularly the role that a single document had played in preventing American casualties and enabling decisive victory. He ordered similar intelligence recovery procedures implemented across all theaters. In Italy, in the Pacific, in every location where American forces operated, document exploitation became a priority mission. The lessons learned from one knocked-out Panther in France shaped intelligence doctrine for the remainder of the war. But the human dimension of the story deserves equal attention. The 47 Shermans that Abrams had been ordered to halt on the morning of October 3rd represented 235 American soldiers, tank commanders, gunners, loaders, drivers, assistant drivers. Each tank crew consisted of 5 men. If those tanks had advanced into the Moyenvic ambush as originally planned, German estimates projected 30 to 40 tanks destroyed in the initial engagement. That would have meant 150 to 200 American casualties, killed or wounded, in the first hour of fighting. Sergeant Holloway, the engineer who found the operational map in the Panther's turret, never received a medal for his discovery. His actions were deemed routine, part of standard document recovery procedures. But decades later, historians interviewed survivors of the 37th Tank Battalion. Many credited Holloway's find with saving their lives. Sergeant Archer, whose Sherman killed the Panther at Moyenvic, remembered learning about the captured map only after the battle. "We thought it was just another operation," he recalled. "We didn't know we'd been minutes away from driving into a death trap." Lieutenant Colonel Abrams, who commanded the 47 Shermans, went on to become one of the most distinguished American armor officers of World War II. He led 4th Armored Division's relief of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge 2 months later. After the war, he rose to command Military Assistance Command Vietnam and later served as Army Chief of Staff. In his memoirs, Abrams devoted several pages to the Moyenvic operation, describing it as the engagement that taught him the critical importance of intelligence in armored warfare. "We had better tanks by 1945, but we won with Shermans because we had better intelligence, better coordination, better tactics." The empathy Eisenhower drew from the Moyenvic engagement was more fundamental. In a letter to General Marshall written on October 8, 5 days after pulling the operational map from the Panther, Eisenhower reflected on what the incident revealed about modern warfare. "Technical superiority in weapons matters," he wrote, "but it is not decisive. The Germans had superior tanks, they had a well-conceived plan, they achieved operational surprise in positioning their forces, yet they lost decisively because we adapted faster. We found their plan, we adjusted our operations within hours, and we turned their ambush into our victory." Eisenhower's analysis touched on a truth that would define American military doctrine for generations. Wars are not won by individual weapon systems, but by organizations that can learn, adapt, and integrate multiple capabilities into coherent operations. The Sherman tank was a component in that system, perhaps not the best component, certainly not the most feared by the enemy, but adequate, good enough. And in war, good enough, properly employed, defeats perfect, inadequately used. The contrast between American and German approaches to armored warfare became stark in the autumn of 1944. German doctrine emphasized the technical superiority of individual weapons. The Panther was indeed a magnificent tank by the engineering standards of its time. 100 millimeters of sloped frontal armor, a high-velocity 75 millimeter gun capable of penetrating any Allied tank at combat ranges, excellent optics, and, when properly maintained, reasonable mechanical reliability. German training emphasized gunnery, the ability to achieve first-round hits at extended ranges, exploiting the Panther's technical advantages. American doctrine, refined through the hard lessons of Normandy and the battles around Arracourt, emphasized something different: combined arms integration. Tank units did not operate alone. They advanced with tank destroyer battalions, providing long-range anti-tank fires. Artillery batteries were positioned to support armored operations with pre-planned concentrations. Infantry accompanied tanks to clear buildings and suppress anti-tank weapons. Air liaison officers traveled with tank battalions to call in strikes when weather permitted. This was the system that defeated Operation Panzerfaust. Patton understood this instinctively. His background included not just armored warfare, but extensive study of logistics, supply, and operational art. He knew that a tank battalion without fuel was useless, regardless of the quality of its vehicles. He knew that tanks without artillery support would be vulnerable to anti-tank guns. He knew that armor without infantry would struggle in urban terrain.
The genius of Third Army's operations in the autumn of 1944 was not tactical brilliance in individual engagements, though that existed, but operational integration across multiple echelons.
The Moyenvic operation demonstrated this integration perfectly. When Eisenhower discovered the German ambush plan, Patton's response was not to commit more tanks. It was to reposition his forces to achieve combined arms superiority at the decisive point. Artillery to suppress German positions, tank destroyers to engage German armor at range, Shermans to exploit once German forces were fixed in place. The result was a 5-to-1 kill ratio achieved against an enemy force that held every technical advantage in tank versus tank combat. German commanders analyzing the Moyenvic defeat struggled to understand what had happened. Their after-action reports, captured when American forces overran 5th Panzer Army headquarters in November, revealed confusion and frustration. American tank crews show no tactical sophistication, one report noted. They rely on overwhelming numbers and artillery support rather than maneuver. The German analysts missed the point entirely. American forces were not trying to win tank duels. They were trying to win campaigns. And campaigns are won by combined arms, not individual weapon systems. This philosophical difference extended to intelligence operations. German operational security at Moyenvic had been excellent by conventional standards. Units moved at night, maintained radio silence, assembled in concealed positions. But German commanders carried detailed operational documents in their command vehicles, documents necessary for coordinating complex operations. When those vehicles were knocked out, the documents survived long enough for American recovery teams to exploit them. German doctrine emphasized operational security before battles. American doctrine emphasized intelligence exploitation after engagements. This systematic approach to document recovery that Eisenhower ordered after Moyenvic became one of the war's quiet success stories. Between October 1944 and May 1945, American intelligence teams recovered operational documents from 147 knocked-out German command vehicles in the European theater. These documents provided advance warning of 23 German operations, revealed the locations of 67 supply dumps, identified 142 headquarters locations, and contributed to the capture of 3 German corps commanders who were found at locations identified in recovered documents. The human cost that was avoided through these intelligence efforts is impossible to calculate precisely. But post-war analyses attempted estimates. The Operations Research Office, analyzing engagements where American forces had advance intelligence of German dispositions, calculated that casualty rates were approximately 40% lower than in engagements where American forces encountered unexpected resistance. Applied across the European theater from October 1944 through May 1945, this suggested that systematic document exploitation prevented roughly 15,000 American casualties. Sergeant Holloway's discovery in the Panther turret outside Arracourt was not unique, but it was emblematic. American soldiers at every level, from privates to generals, contributed to the intelligence effort that gave Allied forces operational advantages German technical superiority could not overcome. This democratization of intelligence, the recognition that crucial information could come from any source at any level, was itself a competitive advantage. German intelligence remained centralized, hierarchical, slow to disseminate findings. American intelligence was distributed, pragmatic, focused on operational utility. The story of the 47 Shermans that Patton halted on the morning of October 3rd illustrates this advantage perfectly. The intelligence that saved those tanks came not from signals intercepts or aerial reconnaissance, though both contributed to the broader intelligence picture. It came from a sergeant examining the wreckage of a single enemy tank, recognizing the significance of what he found and ensuring it reached decision-makers within minutes. The system worked because every soldier understood that intelligence mattered, that documents recovered from enemy vehicles could change operations, save lives. Patton's Third Army became a learning organization, constantly analyzing engagements, identifying patterns, adjusting tactics. Between September and December 1944, Third Army fought 26 major engagements. After each one, staff officers compiled detailed reports: what worked, what failed, what needed to change. Those reports went to division commanders who adjusted tactics, to supply officers who modified procedures, to training centers in England and the United States where new crews learned from the experiences of men already in combat. The cycle of action, analysis, and adaptation continued throughout the war. This organizational learning capability gave American forces advantages that German technical superiority in individual weapons could not overcome. German forces in late 1944 were fighting defensively, trying to preserve strength, avoid decisive engagements, trade space for time. German doctrine emphasized holding positions, counterattacking to restore lost ground, inflicting maximum casualties on advancing Allied forces. This approach required detailed planning, careful coordination, operational security. When that security was compromised, as at Moyenvic, German operations collapsed.
American forces, by contrast, were fighting offensively, seeking decisive engagements, willing to accept tactical setbacks in pursuit of operational objectives. American doctrine emphasized flexibility, rapid decision-making, exploitation of opportunities. When intelligence revealed German positions, American commanders could adjust operations within hours, as Patton did on October 3rd. When operations failed, American forces could break contact, reposition, attack from a different direction. The tempo of operations favored the side that could learn and adapt faster. By November 1944, German forces in the West had been reduced to roughly 60% of their September strength. Losses at Arracourt and Moyenvic had been particularly devastating to 5th Panzer Army, which had committed the bulk of its remaining armor to operations that achieved nothing while losing irreplaceable tanks and crews. The strategic situation facing German commanders was dire. Allied forces controlled the air, possessed overwhelming material superiority, and were advancing on every front. German options were limited to delaying actions, local counterattacks, and desperate gambles. The desperate gamble came in December. The Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last great offensive in the West, committed 3 armies, 28 divisions, over 1,200 tanks, including new King Tigers that weighed 70 tons and mounted 88mm guns. The objective was Antwerp. The result was the largest single battle fought by the United States Army in World War II. Eisenhower's response demonstrated everything Allied forces had learned about armored warfare since Normandy. He did not order a headlong counterattack. He identified the shoulders of the German salient, held them firmly, assembled overwhelming force for a coordinated counterstrike. And he called George Patton. The meeting took place at Verdun on December 19th. Eisenhower asked Patton how quickly Third Army could disengage from current operations, turn 90 degrees north, and attack into the flank of the German offensive. Patton's answer became legendary: 48 hours. He could have 3 divisions on the road in 48 hours. Eisenhower thought he was joking. He was not. Patton had anticipated the crisis. His staff had prepared contingency plans. On December 22nd, 4th Armored Division began its march north toward Bastogne. 100 miles in winter weather over icy roads. They covered the distance in 3 days. On December 26th, lead elements of 4th Armored broke through German lines and reached the encircled paratroopers of the 101st Airborne. This was Eisenhower's vision of armored warfare made manifest. Not tanks dueling tanks in open fields, but armor as a mobile reserve capable of rapid redeployment, sustained by sophisticated logistics, coordinated with infantry and artillery. The Sherman was perfect for this role. Fast, reliable, produced in numbers that allowed commanders to accept losses and keep attacking. The lessons learned from the operational map pulled from a Panther outside Arracourt in October were applied throughout the Bulge campaign. American intelligence teams systematically examined every knocked-out German vehicle, recovering documents that revealed unit locations, supply status, operational objectives. This intelligence, combined with aerial reconnaissance and signals intercepts, gave American commanders a comprehensive picture of German dispositions. When German attacks came, they rarely achieved surprise. When German forces withdrew, American commanders knew which routes they would use and positioned forces to intercept them. By January 1945, the Bulge had been reduced. German losses exceeded 100,000 men and 800 tanks. The Wehrmacht's last strategic reserve in the West had been destroyed. Allied forces prepared for the final push into Germany. Third Army crossed the Rhine on March 22, seizing the bridge at Oppenheim before German engineers could destroy it. Armored columns fanned out across southern Germany, bypassing resistance, cutting lines of communication, encircling entire German armies. This was exploitation warfare as Patton had envisioned it: fast, aggressive, relentless. The Sherman tanks that led this advance were the same basic design that had fought at Arracourt 5 months earlier. Upgraded models with 76mm guns had arrived, but in numbers too small to make a decisive difference. The M26 Pershing, the heavy tank designed to match German armor, reached frontline units only in the war's final weeks. What had changed was not the tanks themselves, but how they were employed. American armored doctrine, refined through hard experience and systematic analysis, had evolved to maximize the Sherman's advantages while minimizing its vulnerabilities.
On May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day, the question that had haunted American tankers since Normandy had been answered. Not with a new tank, not with a technological miracle, but with doctrine, training, adaptation. The Sherman was good enough because the men who crewed it, the officers who commanded it, and the system that supported it had become excellent. That was the real change the captured German documents helped reveal. Not that American tanks needed better guns or thicker armor, though those would have been welcome, but that American forces needed better tactics, better coordination, better employment of capabilities they already possessed. Eisenhower reflected on this in his final report on European operations. He noted that the campaign had been won not by any single weapon or tactic, but by an integrated system of capabilities that reinforced each other. Air superiority allowed ground forces to maneuver without fear of air attack. Naval dominance ensured uninterrupted supply across the Atlantic. Industrial capacity provided replacement equipment faster than it could be destroyed. Training programs produced competent soldiers in numbers sufficient to maintain offensive operations despite casualties. And at the tactical level, combined arms doctrine allowed even outgunned units to defeat technically superior enemies through coordination and teamwork. The story of what Eisenhower pulled from a knocked-out Panzer on the morning of October 3, 1944, is ultimately a story about intelligence, adaptation, and the human dimension of warfare. A sergeant examining wreckage found a document. A lieutenant recognized its significance. A supreme commander acted on it immediately. A commanding general halted an operation within minutes. An entire division repositioned within hours. And 47 Sherman tanks that would have driven into an ambush instead fought a battle on terms favorable to American forces. 235 American soldiers who might have been casualties instead went home after the war. This is the history that deserves to be remembered, not just the battles and the statistics, but the moments when individual initiative, systematic intelligence exploitation, and rapid decision-making combined to save lives and change outcomes.
The Second World War was not won by superior technology alone. It was won by organizations that could learn from their mistakes faster than their enemies could exploit them, by leaders who understood that doctrine matters more than equipment, and by soldiers who fought with courage, intelligence, and determination, even when the odds seemed impossible. That is the lesson of Eisenhower, Patton, and the operational map from a Panther tank. That is the story that continues to shape military thinking 8 decades later. Wars are won by armies that can adapt, by commanders who can make decisions with incomplete information, by soldiers who understand that every piece of intelligence matters, that every document recovered might save lives, that victory belongs not to the side with the best weapons, but to the side that employs its weapons most effectively. If you found this examination of intelligence operations and tactical adaptation valuable, please consider subscribing to our channel. We bring you the untold stories of World War II, the moments that changed campaigns, the decisions that saved lives. These are the stories that textbooks forgot, told with the analytical precision and respect these veterans deserve. The war in Europe ended not because the Allies had the best tanks, but because they had the best army, an army that could learn, an army that could adapt, an army that could win.